Have you ever wondered who was the first being who saw the face of God? Before the man existed, before he said, "Make the light," there was a silent, powerful creation, and practically unknown. The Bible keeps a mystery that few dare to explore: the origin of the first angel created by God. Who was it? What role did you play in the spiritual world? And why your identity is still such a well-kept secret? This is not a curious fact. It is a truth that can transform your way of understanding faith, divine purpose, and the spiritual conflict that we still live. If you believe in Jesus Christ, if you love the Word of God and want to understand why the world is as it is, you need to see this video until the end. Because today, we are going to connect the deepest texts of the Bible with spiritual revelations that will show you an eternal pattern: light, fall, fidelity, silence, and choice. And if you are part of the people of God, this message is not optional. It is urgent. It is not an angelic myth. It is about understanding why you were created, what is your place in the spiritual war, and how to choose the right path in the midst of chaos. Satan doesn't want you to know this. Because when you understand what happened before time, what moved in the invisible world, everything changes. Your faith is strengthened, your spirit wakes up, and you start walking with authority. So get ready. We are going to talk about Lucifer by Miguel Metatron, and the spiritual cycle that begins before Genesis and ends in the Apocalypse. But be careful. What you are going to discover here do not teach you in Sunday school, and you can shake everything you thought you know about Los Angeles. Let me know in the comments. Who do you think was the first angel created by God? Lucifer? Miguel? Another being more hidden? Write your opinion now, because this video is just the beginning of a deep conversation that the Holy Spirit wants to have with you. And if you are ready to receive this spiritual knowledge, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and stay with me until the end. Because what is coming, you can change your life forever. Before time began to run, before the earth was formed, and long before man breathed for the first time, there was already a plane where eternity had no beginning or end. The spiritual world, an invisible kingdom, but more real than anything that our senses can capture. There, where there are no physical limits or time chains, God already worked with wisdom and power. It was in that world that the first acts of their will began to manifest. A wave place of purity, purpose, and order, where faith was not a belief, but a living, constant, and active presence. The Bible does not detail every corner of this plane, but it gives us clues. In Hebrews 11:3, it is revealed that what is seen was made of what was not seen. And that opens a window to understand that the origin of everything is anchored in the spiritual. It was there that the first conscious beings of creation were born, Los Angeles. Light beings, formed not of flesh but of glory, each designed with an eternal purpose, reflecting specific aspects of God's character. And this is where the big question arises: what was the first? We are not talking about any creature, but about the first witness of creation, of which he opened the spiritual eyes in the midst of eternal glory and contemplated for the first time the face of its creator. Imagine it for a moment. In a sea of glowing light, a divine spark takes shape, not fire, but of pure essence. A created being not to live for yourself, but to serve, worship, and execute God's will without hesitation. The Bible mentions legions of angels, but does not give names from the beginning or an obvious chronological order. However, we know that each one has their role, its purpose in the divine plan. In this kingdom, the hierarchy is not measured by human power, but by fidelity, obedience, and reflection of the character of God. And among millions there was one that was first, one that saw the first creative act, which heard the first divine decree, which breathed absolute purity before sin-stained creation. That first angel was not a passive spectator. It was an active part of the great heavenly design. But what did it mean to be the first? It was not a crown of pride, but a monumental responsibility. Being the first is being the pattern, which marks the way for those who come later. It is like the first chord of an eternal symphony. Everything else harmonizes according to that original note. This angel witnessed the design of heaven, of the balance between light and purpose, of the exact moment that God thought of humanity. And here enters a deep detail. If the angels were created before man, then the first one already knew the divine intention of creating beings in the image and likeness of God. What a mystery! What divine honor! The first not only saw but participated in the initial movement of eternity, and that experience had to permeate him with a difficult glory to imagine. But as we will see later, with great glory, there is also the possibility of great fall. And that dilemma marks all the spiritual conflict that will be unleashed later. This spiritual world is not separated from ours as we think. In fact, it is interwoven with everyday reality. Every decision we make, every thought of faith, every silent prayer, touches that eternal plane. Jesus Christ, during his ministry, constantly spoke of that kingdom that is not seen with his eyes but that is inside us. Luke 17:21. It is in that kingdom where the angels operate, where the divine instructions are emitted, and where the battle for our souls is constantly fought. Therefore, understanding the origins of the spiritual world is not a simple theological curiosity. It is key to living a deep spiritual life. Faith is not just a feeling, it is the form of direct connection with that invisible plane. The Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, gives us glimpses, whispers of that parallel world. And know who was the first angel created by God can help us understand not only heavenly history, but also our place within the eternal plan. And it is thus, immersed in the mystery of the invisible, that we prepare to move towards an even deeper revelation. If the spiritual world existed before all, and it was there that the first angel emerged, what kind of light was that manifested before the sun shone? Could that light be more than a metaphor? Maybe we are facing a hidden track, a sacred reflection of the first created being. Accompany me, because now we will enter an even more mysterious and powerful terrain. The light before the light. Before the sun hangs into the heavens, before the stars were scattered as diamonds in the vast darkness of the universe, there was already light. But it was not a common light, like the one we know with our physical eyes. No, this was a spiritual light, a direct emanation of the glory of God, a pure manifestation of his presence. When in Genesis 1:3 God said, "Be the light," many assume that it is the sun, but the sun only appears in verse 14. So what kind of light is this that illuminates without physical source? It is here that the ancient Hebrew sages introduced the concept of, or ganuz, the hidden light. According to tradition, this light not only lit, but revealed the purpose, the divine intention, the heavenly plan in its purest state. And some theologians and mystics argue that this light was not a thing, but a being. Think about it. If this light came before any physical creation, and if God is spirit, John 4:24, then this light is spiritual by nature. Many believe that this was the first manifestation of a heavenly being, an angel so intimately linked to the divine glory that was not distinguished from it. It did not shine on its own merit, but reflected the very essence of God. It was not God, but he was saturated with his presence. That is why some link this light with the first created angel, a being so bright that its very existence is confused with spiritual light. Jesus himself said, "I am the light of the world," John 8:12, which reminds us that all true light comes from God. But this first light reflection, before even the celestial bodies, was something different. It was like the divine breath that takes shape, the first creative sigh of the Most High. The Or Ganuz, according to Jewish literature, was hidden by God after Adam's sin, reserved for the righteous in the end of time. But what if that light also represents a being that was removed from the visible stage for reasons that still escape us? And if that being, full of light, was part of an earlier stage of the divine plan and now operates from the shadows, as a silent witness of the conflict between good and evil? The Apocalypse mentions an angel with a face like the sun, Revelation 10:1, and although the text does not clearly identify who refers, descriptions evoke that original light. This angel, wrapped in a cloud, with an iris arc on his head, suggests a direct connection with eternal glory. Is this a reference to the one who was the light before the light? It is a mystery that only reveals those who seek with faith, hungry, to understand the depths of the Bible and the heart of God. Faith does not consist only of accepting the obvious, but in exploring the invisible, which is revealed between lines. And here we enter a land that not everyone dares to step on, because if this light hides a being, then its identity was not hidden by error, but by divine purpose. Maybe God, in His infinite wisdom, knew we were not ready to completely understand this first bearer of light. But there are clues, fragments, echoes of that hidden glory that still resonate in sacred texts. This light, a reflection of divine holiness, not only existed at the beginning, but is still alive in each act of genuine faith, in each deep prayer, in each gesture of love inspired by Jesus Christ. Just as the physical world needs the sun, the soul needs this spiritual light to orient in the midst of the shadows of sin. And with this revelation in the heart, we advance one more step towards the mystery. Because if there was a light prior to all visible creation, and if this light could be an angelic manifestation, then the following question is inevitable. Who are the most likely candidates to occupy that place of honor? Which of the angels known to the Bible conforms to this luminous description? Will it be the brilliant but fallen Lucifer? Or maybe the obedient Miguel? And what about the enigmatic Metatron? Accompany me, because now we enter the analysis of the possible carriers of that primary light. When we talk about the first angel created by God, it is impossible not to ask ourselves who, among all the heavenly beings mentioned in the Bible and in ancient texts, could have occupied that place of honor. Throughout the scriptures and of the tradition, names that shine for their role in spiritual history are mentioned: Lucifer, Miguel, and Metatron, each with unique characteristics, with different missions, and with deep footprints in the fabric of the spiritual world. It is not simply a competence of power or beauty, but to identify which of them was the initial reflection of divine glory. Faith teaches us that God does nothing without purpose, and the creation of the first angel had to mark a crucial starting point for everything that would come later. So now, as good seekers of truth, we will explore these three candidates with well-open wisdom and eyes. We start with Lucifer, also known as Luzbel. His name means bearer of light, and with that many assume that he was the first. In Ezekiel 28:14, it is described as grande, protector, perfect in all its paths from the day it was created. He walked between firestones, an expression that suggests access to sacred dimensions, close to the throne of God. His beauty, wisdom, and splendor were incomparable, to the point of having been confused with himself. The problem was that the reflection of light made him think it was the source. That confusion was the beginning of his fall. Isaiah 14:12. He calls it, "How you fell from heaven, O Lucero, son of the morning," which reflects his decline from heavenly heights. Lucifer could have been the first, yes, but his pride led him to become an enemy of what one day he reflected. Its history is a warning. Even those closest to God can get lost if they forget who is the true source of glory. Then we have Miguel, or Michael, whose name means "who is God." Only that question is a statement of eternal loyalty. In Revelation 12:7, Miguel appears leading the heavenly armies against the dragon, that is, against Lucifer. Unlike the latter, Miguel does not shine for appearance but for fidelity. He is the heavenly warrior, the protector of God's people, also mentioned in Daniel's book, Daniel 10:13 and 12:1. According to some apocryphal writings such as Enoch's book, Miguel has been present from the beginning, always on the side of divine justice. Although it is not described as the brightest, its firmness makes it eternal. What if God in his wisdom did not choose the most glowing as the first angel, but the most faithful? Miguel represents that kind of silent greatness, which does not need prominence, but simply fulfills his call with precision and obedience. His role could place it as the first, not by appearance, but by substance. And then, he is Metatron, the most mysterious of all. It does not appear directly in the canonical Bible, but is widely mentioned in Jewish apocryphal and mystical texts, such as the Zohar and the third book of Enoch. According to these sources, Metatron would be nothing less than the patriarch, Enoch, transformed into a heavenly being after being taken by God, Genesis 5:24. But there is more. Some rabbis consider it the first being emanating directly from the divine essence, even before Lucifer. It is called the Minor Yah, or the celestial writing, in charge of registering each action of humanity. If this were true, Metatron would not only have been the first, but also the closest to divine secrets. Its function is not to fight or shine, but save, reveal, right. In that sense, it represents the most silent and deep aspect of the presence of God, the one that does not shout, but sees everything. His candidacy invites us to think that the first may not be the most visible, but the most hidden. Then, among these three, Lucifer, the glowing fallen, Miguel, the faithful guerrero, and Metatron, the silent scribe. Who really was the first? The Bible does not say it clearly, and perhaps it is because that truth is too sacred to be delivered directly. But each of them reveals a different facet of the character of God, His glory, His justice, and His hidden wisdom. And by meditating in these beings, we also discover something about ourselves. Because each of these angels reflects decisions that we all face in our spiritual life: continue to shine for God or want to shine for oneself, obey without seeking fame or revealing itself by pride, save the sacred silence or act with impulse. Faith calls us to reflect, to look for those answers not only in the texts, but in our intimate relationship with Jesus Christ, which is true light. And so after having considered these three candidates, we realize that the first angel is not only a historical figure, but a spiritual symbol. His existence raises a deeper question. Why did God create the possibility of good and evil, light and shadow? If there was a first, there was also an election. And now, we enter the next level of this mystery: the great balance between light and shadow, and how that balance is the key to all the heavenly conflict. From the first moment that God created a being with free will, the universe was divided between two great spiritual forces, light and shadow. And, not as absolute enemies, but as elements that coexist in a delicate balance that supports all creation. When God designed the spiritual world, He did not create heavenly automatons who worshipped Him without option. No. He, in His infinite wisdom and love, gave angels the ability to choose, to love freely, to serve by will and not by programming. This detail, apparently simple, changes everything. Because where there is choice, there is also a possibility of disobedience. And where there is freedom, there is also responsibility. Therefore, the existence of the first angel was not only the beginning of a hierarchy, but the activation of an eternal pattern, the ability to choose between serving God or seeking His own glory. Faith charges its value precisely for that freedom, because without the possibility of denying God, there would not be a merit of worshiping Him. The fall of Lucifer, the loyalty of Miguel, and the silence of Metatron then become deep symbols of the spiritual conflict that lives in every corner of the universe, even inside us. Lucifer represents the shadow, not as a force created by God, but as the result of a crooked choice, a distorted reflection of light. Its history reminds us that even beings closest to the throne can deviate if they move away from humility. Miguel, on the other hand, represents the light that remains firm, not because he had no option to rebel, but because he chose not to do so. In the midst of chaos, he chose to say, "Who is God?" And Metatron, wrapped in mystery, represents hidden knowledge, the wisdom that observes and records, without openly interfering with the conflict. The three form a sacred triangle, a scheme that is repeated from heaven to our daily decisions: rebellion, fidelity, and contemplation. This balance between light and shadow is not an accident, but part of the eternal plan. God was not surprised by Lucifer's fall. In fact, the entire biblical narrative already anticipated the conflict, from the Eden to the apocalypse. Jesus, Christ Himself, came into the world as light in darkness, John 1:5, to show us that even in a world injured by sin, light continues to shine. Each of us is immersed in this same spiritual tension. Our daily decisions, however small, are aligned with that great battle: loving others, forgiving, praying, keeping faith. All of that are acts of light. Instead, pride, selfishness, indifference are shadows that seek to infiltrate the soul. And it's not about living with fear, but with spiritual conscience. Understanding that we are part of this balance, we also understand that our choices matter, because every soul, Every prayer, every act of love, moves the balance of the spiritual universe. It is important to clarify that the shadow does not have the same power as light. They are not the same. God did not create two opposite forces, competing on equal terms. The shadow only exists where the light is absent. The final victory of the light is assured from the beginning, but the process requires our participation. As disciples of Jesus, we are not called to be spectators, but soldiers of light, bearers of the kingdom, in the middle of darkness. The Bible calls us light of the world, Matthew 5:14, because just as angels reflect the glory of God, we are also called to reflect Christ with our lives, and this call has an eternal weight. Each decision we make resonates in the spiritual world, as the decisions of those first angels marked the fate of millions. Faith is not an individual bubble, but a torch that can illuminate paths, even in pain. And then, having understood that the creation of the first angel opened the door for the existence of good and evil, love and pride, light and shadow, it is time to observe how heaven reacted to the fall. Because not everything remained in chaos. God, in his wisdom, reorganized the heavenly ranks, establishing new hierarchies, new strategies, new functions for faithful angels. And that is where the next great chapter of this spiritual journey enters. The heavenly reorganization after the rebellion. After the outbreak of the celestial conflict, that rebellion that left the heavens with a roar of pride and fall, God did not let the chaos reign. In his infinite wisdom, he established a new structure in the heavenly kingdom. Lucifer's fall not only left a vacuum in the spiritual hierarchy, but also revealed the need for a clearer, firmer organization to ensure that the divine will was fulfilled precisely. Thus, according to the writings of the Pseudo-Dionysio Areopagita, the angelic division into 9 heavenly choirs, grouped into 3 hierarchies: seraphim, cherubs, thrones, dominations, virtues, power, principalities, archangels, and angels, each with specific tasks, with a place assigned by God, under a perfect logic that does not seek competition, but harmony. Faith shows us that when the enemy acts, God responds with order, with purpose, with strategy. And this reorganization is not symbolic, it is spiritual, alive, active. In this new structure, we see more prominent names that until then seemed silent. Miguel, for example, ascends as a supreme commander of the heavenly hosts. It is no longer only a warrior, but a symbol of rewarded fidelity. His name resonates as a banner in the spiritual war, leading armies in defense of God's people. Gabriel, the faithful messenger, takes a position as a divine news herald, in charge of announcing events that would change the course of humanity, such as the birth of Jesus Christ, Luke 4:1-26-38. Raphael, although it appears mainly in Tobit's book, is remembered as a healer and guide. Each of them now occupies a strategic role, assigned by God himself to counteract the works of darkness. Instead of being carried away by chaos, heaven becomes an orderly spiritual field, where each angel acts as part of an army of light, guided by eternal wisdom. The fascinating thing about this reorganization is that it reflects a principle that also applies to our lives. When we suffer losses, when something breaks, when we feel that the enemy has hit us, God does not leave us in ruins. He reorganizes. He restores. He repositions everything that was broken and gives new purpose to what seemed lost. Just as the sky was structured after the rebellion, so our lives can find a new order after pain. The Bible reminds us that all things help those who love God, Romans 8:28. And this includes falls, crises, moments of darkness. Because when God enters the scene, even what was used for evil, he transforms it to fulfill his plan. This truth fills us with hope. The same God who restructured the heavens is willing to reorganize your interior, your purpose, your destiny. In addition, this celestial organization is not static or decorative. Each angelic choir fulfills specific functions which directly impact the spiritual life of believers. The seraphim burn in love in front of the throne. The cherubs guard the divine wisdom. The thrones reflect the justice of God. The dominations supervise the angelic missions. The virtues execute miracles. The powers maintain the cosmic order. And in the last hierarchy, the principalities take care of regions and nations, the archangels execute special tasks, and personal angels accompany us as messengers and guardians. Nothing is random. Everything is arranged with purpose. And you, who are watching this video, also forms part of this great design. Because when you pray, when you are looking for God, when you follow Jesus Christ with sincerity, you activate that spiritual structure that was designed to help you, protect, and guide you. And so, understanding that the fall of one did not destroy the sky, but strengthened it, we prepared to look towards the end of the times. Because this first angel, whoever is, did not disappear from spiritual history. According to the scriptures, his presence manifests itself again in the book of Apocalypse. There, the three candidates who studied before reappear with key functions. One as accused, another as a defender, and another as a guardian of eternal secrets. What role each one plays in the outcome of spiritual history? How does the cycle that began before the creation of the world closed? Accompany me, because now we enter the end of the end. The spiritual cycle that began before the visible time finds its climax in the apocalypse. There, the pieces that God moved in the heavens from the beginning return to the scene to close the eternal conflict between light and shadow. What was sown in the spiritual world before Genesis is now revealed in fullness. And at this end, the three great angelical protagonists occupy the center of the stage. Lucifer, already fallen, appears as the great accuser, the dragon, the ancient snake, Apocalypse 12:9, facing his final judgment. Miguel, the faithful warrior, resurfaces as commander of the heavenly forces, beating the dragon and throwing him into the earth, Revelation 12:7-8. And Metatron, although not mentioned by name in the biblical canon, is evoked in apocalyptic texts such as the guardian of the records, the scribe of the trial, which reveals the hidden in the books of the works. This final chapter is not just a closure, it is the revelation of God's eternal purpose. Lucifer, who could have been the first, is now unmasked. He no longer presents himself as an angel of light, but as the great enemy of humanity. His fall, registered from Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, reaches his final sentence in Revelation 20:10. And the devil was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, and will be tormented day and night for centuries of the centuries. This is the consummation of your rebellion. Its history, marked by pride and the desire to be worshipped, ends in total defeat. And that is where divine justice shines with all its strength. God does not punish by whim, but by fidelity to his holy character. Each act is heavy, each word is registered, each intention is revealed. Faith teaches us that no enemy of God can resist forever. Sooner or later, every knee will be folded, and every spirit, angelic or human, will recognize the absolute sovereignty of God. On the other hand, Miguel does not disappear from the heavenly scene. His presence in the apocalypse demonstrates that his fidelity was not only useful in the fall, but also essential in the restoration. He represents constancy, unwavering obedience, absolute surrender to the purpose of God. Does not seek glory, does not demand recognition. His power does not come from himself, but from the one who sent him. In Judas 1:9, we see him facing the devil even for the body of Moses, a scene that demonstrates the depth of his commitment to the divine plan. In Revelation, he not only defeats the enemy, but defends the saints, protects the woman dressed in sun, symbol of God's people. His spiritual sword does not oxidize because it is forged in loyalty. Miguel is the angel who teaches us that what matters is not to be the first, but to be faithful until the end. And in that fidelity, there is a force that neither hell can resist. And then there is the enigmatic paper of Metatron, who keeps the books. Although his name does not appear in Apocalypse, the idea of the Book of Life, Revelation 20:12, and other books where each other's works are recorded, is present, with force. Who writes them? Who custody them? Some apocryphal and mystical texts say that Metatron is the heavenly scribe, which scores each act, every word, every sentence. In a world where he forgets so much, this angel reminds us that nothing goes unnoticed. in the eyes of God. Every tear, every act of faith, every decision made on behalf of Jesus Christ is registered. This aspect of the final judgment is not a threat, but a promise. Nothing we do for the love of God will be ignored. And while Metatron is a veiled figure, its symbolism tells us about the eternal memory of heaven, that our life has spiritual weight, that our history is being written in heaven. Thus, the end of the times is not a moment of fear for those who walk with God, but of hope. The angels return to the stage, not as myths, but as active agents of the trial, of defense and prophetic fulfillment. The first one that was created, whoever is, will have its part in this outcome. Either as accused, as a defender, or as a witness, his complete presence the cycle that began early. And you, who are part of the people of faith, are also connected to this eternal cycle, not as a spectator but as heir to promise. Because Jesus Christ, the King of Kings, will not come alone. He will come with his angels, with open books, with justice in hand, and with the name of each of his written in heaven. And so, after having traveled this story from the invisible to the eternal, we only have one more question, a deep reflection that leads us to the very heart of God. Why never clearly told us who was the first angel? Why keep that mystery? Maybe the answer is in something deeper than a name. Perhaps the important thing is not who it was, but what it represents. And that is what we are going to discover now. When one immerses himself in the mysteries of the spiritual world, it is natural to want clear answers, specific names, chronological details. We want to know who was the first, how it was created, what exact role he played. But God, in his sovereign wisdom, does not always give us that information directly. And that, far from frustrating us, should lead us to a deeper understanding. There are things that are not revealed, not because they are hidden by whim, but because they are sacred, too glorious to be reduced to simple data. Perhaps the name of the first angel is not written because his identity transcends an individual. Perhaps God wanted that instead of focusing on who it was, we reflected on what it represents. In the silence of the Bible, there is many times more revelation than in words. And that silence, in this case, invites us to meditate on the eternal spiritual patterns that remain in force until today. This original angel was whoever embodies a dynamic that is repeated from heaven to our daily decisions. Light, fall, faithfulness, silence, choice. Each of those elements is present in our lives. We are created with light, the image of God, but we face the possibility of falling, like Lucifer. We also have the opportunity to stay faithful, such as Miguel. And at certain times, we are called to remain silent and observe, as Metatron. In that sense, the first angel is not only a historical figure, but a spiritual mirror. Its history is interwoven with ours. Faith is not simply to believe in what happened, but to live according to the patterns that the sky established from the beginning. That is why Jesus Christ calls us to live in the light, John 8:12, to resist the enemy, James 4:7, and to stay in holiness, knowing that what happens in the spiritual world has eternal repercussions. And there is something even deeper in this mystery: the choice. God could have created beings without free will, but chose to give us the ability to decide. And that makes our faith have real weight. We do not follow God because we are programmed, but because we love him. We do not serve Jesus Christ because there is no alternative, but because we recognize that he is the way, truth, and life. This freedom is a heavenly gift, but also a tremendous responsibility. Each angel had to decide whether to obey or rebel. Each of us too. And that daily choice, to love, forgive, serve, trust, aligns us with the original light. It is not about seeking the power of angels, but about reflecting the humility of Christ. Because in the end, the one who truly wants to be great in the kingdom of God must learn to serve with love and walk in silent obedience. The Bible is clear. We do not need to know all the names to understand the heart of God. What he wants is that we learn from the symbols, from acts, of the spiritual patterns that reveal their character. The first angel, whoever is, was created to reflect the glory of God. If it fell, it was for pride. If he remained, it was for fidelity. If he was silent, it was for wisdom. And these three routes are still open for us today. We can choose to shine on your own and fall. We can choose to obey and be raised. Or we can choose to observe, learn, and advance with reverence. Each path leads to a different spiritual destination. Therefore, more than an answer, this story offers us an invitation to live as those who understand that their life has an eternal purpose. May your faith be more than belief, that it is your way of walking, to love, to see the world with the eyes of the Spirit. And so we reach the end of this journey, but not at the end of learning. Because this mystery, who was the first angel created by God, is still an open door for reflection, prayer, and search. The important thing is not to have all the answers, but to have the heart willing to learn, to grow, to get closer to God every day. Perhaps the first angel is not a name to discover, but a lesson to apply. Light, fall, loyalty, silence, choice. That each one of us chooses to walk in the light, as children of the Most High, guided by the Bible, inspired by the example of Jesus Christ, and strengthened by faith in the God who sees everything, orders everything, and that never stops writing our history from heaven. Now that you know this spiritual mystery, I want to know, what do you think? Do you think Lucifer was really the first, or that there is an older being that remains hidden in God's eternal plans? Write it in the comments and share your opinion with the community. I want to read your perspective and respond personally. And if this content touched your spirit, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and activate notifications, so you will not miss the next videos that will reveal hidden truths of the Bible, strengthening your faith and getting closer to the purpose that God has for you. Share this video with someone who needs to wake up spiritually. And if it impacted you, I invite you to see the next one that will appear here on the screen. There you will discover another powerful revelation that many do not know and that can transform your spiritual life completely. See you in the next video.